Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am the Indomitable Blackman. Welcome to an episode of whatever I'm choosing to call this, whatever it shall be. But here we are. Today, I'm going to talk to you about a very important topic, which is the basis of pretty much all of my messages on all of my social media: why spanking doesn't work the way we think it does. We have this mindset that spanking works, that it's always worked, that it's been happening since the beginning of time, and pain is the best teacher. And we're going to talk about why that's completely false. The first part, we're gonna talk about this in sections. And so the first thing we're going to look at is spanking is not a cultural benefit. From there, we're going to talk about why spanking doesn't teach you anything. And then finally, we're going to talk about why the brain doesn't know the difference between abuse and discipline. Because a lot of people, they want to say that, it's the difference between abuse and discipline. Not to the brain. The brain does not understand that. And so we're going to talk about all of these things more in depth. So let's just dive right in, right? So first things first, spanking is not a cultural benefit. I know to a lot of people, spanking is like the bond. It's the glue. Like we bond through trauma, but that shouldn't be a cultural thing. Honestly, like it's trauma bonding is unhealthy, and as a person who's coming from the black community, that's something that's very prevalent. Like you spank, and I'm a Southern black man, so it's something that I was raised on. Like growing up, it's not uncommon to hear family and friends talking about getting spanked at like a funeral or a wedding or something like that. Sitting around Big Mama house and you talking about how she tore your butt up and all that stuff. That's that's a very Southern black thing, and a lot of other black people have that same experience. But it's actually really detrimental to our community, right? So the first thing I want to talk about is how corporal punishment for children, do not misconstrue me, corporal punishment for children is very European. It's not African. It's not indigenous to the Americas. It is very European. That is something that started in Europe and it continued throughout Europe. There was a huge emphasis on the sanctity of children in West Africa, in much of Africa. You wouldn't hit your kid because you had too much respect and love for them, and there's no evidence of spanking in Africa or the Americas prior to colonization. And I would like to cite Dr. Stacy Patton on that same thing. So you have instances. If you ever seen the TV show, I think it's Highlander. Is it Highlander? Outlander. So in the TV show Outlander, you see where this one kid, I think he lied or he stole something, and they nailed his ear to a stake. And that's actually something that has been a thing for years. Horrible corporal punishment for kids, and it only got heightened after Christianity, and not Christianity, the religion as it is supposed to be presented, but Christian, like Western Christianity. There was this idea that kids are inherently evil and sinful, and that you have to beat them into submission and all this stuff. And it had oof, 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 no. So it led to a lot of abuse, straight up abuse. You didn't need to. Why would you nail somebody's ear, a kid's ear, to a stake? That's ridiculous. And after colonization happened, a lot of that mindset spread to the different colonies, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. And so I also like to cite Stacey Patton again when she says African Americans adopted the practice of beating children from white slave masters. Europeans brutalized their own children for thousands of years prior to crossing the Atlantic to the New World and colonizing Africa. Historians and anthropologists have found no evidence that ritualistic forms of physical discipline of children existed in the pre colonial West Africa societies prior to the Atlantic slave trade. West African societies held children in a much higher regard than slave societies in the Atlantic world, which placed emphasis on black bodies as property, not as human beings. West Africans believed that children came from the afterlife, that they were gods or reincarnated ancestors who led profoundly spiritual lives and held extraordinary mystical powers that could be harnessed through ritual practice for the good of the community. In fact, it was believed that coercion and hitting a child could scare off their soul. Indigenous people in North America held similar beliefs. As colonization, slavery, and genocidal violence made life harsher for these groups, parenting practices also grew harsher. So you can see how a lot of the stuff that they did was as an adaptation to the brutality of colonization. It didn't start off where we were just hitting kids. That's not a thing that we ever did. And now to add on to that, it's important to note that a lot of spanking is predominantly done in the South. Like twice as likely to be done in the South. It's as opposed to the North. They're like, and another thing we have to talk about is how a lot of black people say that white people don't beat their kids. That's not true. White people are less likely to talk about it. Black people and black and brown people are more open with it, and they joke about it. It's like a cultural icon, but white people don't talk about it that much. I know for a fact white people be tearing their kids up. But it's important to note the reason why a lot of people of color spank their kids, because it's out of survival and it's also out of a proximity to whiteness. Like, case in point, you have remnants of slavery where a lot of the culture is still based on blind subservience to leaders of authority, to teach the principle of, if you don't submit to me, you're not going to submit to like the police or people who can put you in jail or kill you, right? And so you beat your kid and you're trying to break their will so they can be docile to the people who are in charge. We don't have to do that as much anymore. And it's actually led to the inverse, because look at how many people are in jail even though they got their butts whooped. When you realize that police violence is not correlated to what our actions are, it's just based on what their actions are. If they want to shoot you, they're going to shoot you. It can be Wednesday and they just want to shoot you and you can just get killed. It can be Tuesday and they just want to throw some drugs on you. It's not correlated based on your behavior as much as it is based on what they're feeling like they want to do at the time. So it's kind of pointless to just keep spanking your kid for the point of trying to protect them from something when they can still be killed. Because I'm pretty sure Tamir Rice got his butt toe up. And Philando Castile. And Freddie Gray. And Cedra Bland. Like the entire list. Like, come on. I know I've said this before, and a lot of people really don't want to believe what I say. They think I'm saying, like, they're thinking it's a stretch, but I don't believe that you can be pro-black and hit your kids. I don't think you can be pro-indigenous and hit your kids, because it's colonizer behavior. We've just seen it. But let's talk about the similarities between spanking a kid as it is in modern times and spanking a slave or whipping a slave, right? Bear with me. Most of the time when we hit a kid, not that we should or that I do, but whenever growing up, we've seen where parents will take a kid, have them strip, and then they beat the crap out of them, right? Don't move your hand, bend over this, stop crying, don't you run, you better stay right here. And let's look at what they did to slaves. They would get a slave, kicking and screaming, chain them up to something, strip them down, do the same thing. Don't run, stop that crying. The similarities are striking. And so we see how there have been the same principles across the board. You want complete control of this person's autonomy, even when the person's brain is saying run and protect yourself, because that is what the human mind is supposed to do with self-preservation. You're forcing that person to abandon their own natural inclination to protect themselves, to inflict damage on them for the purposes of correcting them or correcting their behavior. And then right after, there is this trauma bonding where you're like on both ends, like the slave master and the slave and the parent and the child. I do it because I love you. I'm doing it because you was acting up, and I care about you and all that stuff. No, you're trauma bonding. You're making a really weird relationship between you and the child is going to grow up to expect the same treatment from other people. So what are some ways that we can correct our children without hitting or inflicting damage? And trauma and stress are natural parts of life. We're going to deal with trauma. We're going to deal with stress. Nobody's really exempt from that unless you live a perfect life. It's going to happen. But the first thing we need to do is recognize our own faults and our failures as a parent, and recognizing that we have the propensity and we have the possibility of inflicting trauma and stress in our kids' life because we're not perfect. We need to make peace with that fact. And then we need to operate from that place. Yes, I have the ability to traumatize my child. So I need to be cognizant and hyper vigilant of all the things that I can do that could inflict that trauma. And then think of other ways that you cannot do that. We all make mistakes, but we can get help. We can get therapy. We can deal with our trauma before we have kids. But let's look at some practical things that you can do past that. First, set realistic expectations, right? Our kids, they develop at different levels. No kid is the same. There are general stages of cognitive development, but it's not always for each kid. And you can't say what works for one kid will work for another kid. It may not necessarily work. Human behavior is very predictable, which is why I make these videos, but we also have to recognize that there are nuances in between. But in none of those do you have to hit a kid. You can just adjust how you're talking or communicating to that child. It's also important to understand the levels of cognition and the levels of behavioral cognition as they're developing. Everybody should take a course in developmental psychology. If you have a child, you should be studying these theories because it can help you get a better understanding of where your child is mentally. And if you can understand where they are mentally, then you can make the accommodations necessary for them to be successful at what they are going to do. And when you have moments, and let's not pretend, every parent, one of the biggest comments I see all the time is, where are your kids? You don't know what it's like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But everything you're saying, you're just admitting that you have emotional responses to the behaviors that your children are doing. And you don't believe that I understand what it's like because I seem like I don't have those same emotional responses. That's not true. I have had kids pull out one of my locks. I have been kicked in the chest. I have been slapped. I have been spit on. Anything you can think that your kids have done to you, I promise you a kid has done to me. I still have to watch how I respond to the child because I know that my actions can be detrimental to the life of that child and my career, but mainly that child. So we can't use you don't know what it's like, or you don't have kids, or I'm having an emotional, frustrated response to my child and life happening around me, so I'm taking it out on my child as an excuse. It does not work. We can't afford to do that. We can't afford to take out our frustration on a child. So what we can do is we can take a step back. When this kid snatched one of my locks out of my head, I stopped. I stopped moving. I did not move because I knew if I would have moved, I would have done something. I did not want to do something, so I stopped dead in my tracks. When I stopped, I thought about the situation. I said, did he just snatch out one of my dreads? I know this boy did not snatch out one of my locks. Gabe, now calm down. You need this job. If you, ancestors, I got this. Don't, no, I got it. Cause see, if I move, y'all gonna try to hit him. I ain't trying to hit him. I got this. Let me just, if I hit him, he's gonna be terrified. And it's gonna break all the pairing that I've done up to now. I'll lose my job. I won't be able to work with kids ever again. So I'm not gonna do that. What can I do to teach this kid that he should not have done that, and there's a better way to show that he's frustrated? All right, let's take a deep breath. All right, let's go back. This whole thought process took place in about a span of 5 seconds, if that, at most 5 seconds. And it's a practice. It's not something that's overnight. It's not. Nothing that I say is an overnight fix. This is something that I have to practice at daily. And as I continue to practice, I get better at it. Practice it. Meditate. Deep breathe. Go for a walk. Do martial arts, yoga, climbing, working out. Do something where you can regularly deal with your stress in a productive, healthy fashion so you're not taking it out on your kids. And if you do it, you could even bring your kids along with you to do it as well. And they can see how you deal with stress, and then they'll learn how to deal with stress. It's about modeling. It's all about thinking about how your actions and behavior are seen through the eyes of your child. and putting yourself in the place of your child. Empathy is not something that Americans do very well. We don't really do a lot of empathy in the Western world, but it's something so vital with working with kids. So let's think about what I've said. Let's think about what I've been talking about. And this week, I would love it if all of you could find different ways to correct your child's behavior without hitting. And then comment and tell me different options below. We're a community. It takes a village to raise a kid. And so some of the things that you do can help another person. So down below, just type, hey, this is what I do for my kid. This is what I did for that kid. This is what my mom did for me. And let's grow together. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe, favorite, all of that jazz. I'll see y'all next time.